Right, I think it's gone 1 o'clock, so we might get started. Alice, are we right to go online? Yes. Okay, very good. Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends and colleagues, very warm welcome to our hybrid event today. Both to those of you here in Vienna, we have a very full room. For those online, they may not see the full room, but we've got a full house here, and warm welcome to those who have joined us online today as well. Today's special high-level event is being co-hosted by Angola and Peru, together with the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, and I'm honoured to chair that initiative, and I'll be your moderator for today. Now, while we've made progress in tackling wildlife trafficking over the past decade, this progress is both fragile and insufficient, and we are still nowhere near ending these crimes, which are escalating against the backdrop of rapidly changing environmental, human health and security challenges, as we just heard in plenary a few moments ago. We clearly need to do more, and it's wonderful to see that here in Vienna, at the UN Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, states are discussing how to enhance efforts to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking, both within the formal part of the session, as we saw yesterday and just a few moments ago, and inside events such as the one we're having today. Angola, Kenya and Peru submitted the historic resolution adopted by the Commission last year on strengthening the international legal framework for international cooperation to prevent and combat illicit trafficking in wildlife, which was co-sponsored by another 12 states, including Gabon, the Philippines and the USA, who are all represented on the panel here today. And yesterday, the UNODC, and it's lovely to see Rika here, reported back to the Commission on the views expressed by member states in response to the questionnaire that was circulated earlier this year. And these responses addressed how to strengthen the international legal framework and also provided information on national legislation, approaches and measures. And at the request of Angola and Gabon, the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime undertook a preliminary and partial review of these responses, and our findings are available online. But in short, we found that of the 53 member states expressing a view on a possible additional protocol to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking, 75% were either in favour or open to discussing it, with some requesting further information or suggesting its scope be broadened to include other environmental crimes. Some other states offered alternative ways of strengthening the international legal framework. And today we have a wonderful opportunity to further discuss these issues. And in doing so, we're honoured to have such a distinguished panel with high-level speakers from 6 member states, together with the co-founder of Pro Wildlife, who will talk about the trafficking in species that are not protected under international law, often referred to as non-CITES listed species. Colleagues, as you can see, we have quite a packed agenda today, but if all goes according to plan, we will have some time at the end to invite other member states to take the floor and express any views they'd like to share today. So with that, we're going to get started with our first speaker. Our first speaker is joining us via a video. It's His Excellency Professor Lee White. He is the Minister of Water and Forest, the Sea and Environment in Gabon. He's been a very prominent voice for tackling wildlife trafficking for a very long time now. And we're delighted that Minister White is able to join us. So Alice, if we could go to the video, that would be great.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, almost exactly 2 years ago, in May 2021, I joined you during the 30th session of this Commission to call for a new global agreement on tackling wildlife trafficking through an additional protocol under the UNTOC. The presidents of Gabon and Costa Rica were the first to call for such an agreement, having identified the clear and serious gaps in our current international legal framework. The presidents of Angola and Malawi followed shortly afterwards. Since then, the European Union also committed to promoting a similar agreement in its EU Action Plan against wildlife trafficking. And in February 2023, the American Bar Association adopted a resolution urging UNTOC parties to adopt an additional protocol against wildlife crime. Colleagues, Resolution 31/1, which you are all familiar with, was the first UN resolution to mention a global agreement against wildlife trafficking, and it started a much-needed, inclusive, intergovernmental process to consult member states on this matter. It was a groundbreaking resolution, and we are most grateful to Angola, Kenya, and Peru for their efforts in drafting and promoting it. Now that member states have had the opportunity to express their views on this matter, it is time for us to come together and discuss what the next step should be. Some states clearly favour the additional protocol under the UNTOC. Some might lean towards another kind of agreement, while others might suggest a different route altogether. Gabon is one of 4 biodiversity-rich source countries to have publicly called for a global agreement against wildlife trafficking. This is not a coincidence. We are countries that are on the receiving end of this highly destructive trafficking every day. We view wildlife trafficking not only as an ecological and economic threat, but also as a threat to peace and security in our country. We now seek the support of other source countries, as well as the destination and transit countries, to initiate an inclusive and constructive process to explore the potential benefits and scope of a new global agreement on wildlife trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Minister White for that very powerful statement. We're now going to move to our second speaker, someone who has been very active with the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime since its inception, Ms. Juan Francisco Fernandez. She's the Secretary of State for Climate and Sustainable Development of Angola. Secretary of State.
Thank you, John, and thank you to everyone who has been joining us today, in person or online. I'm delighted to take part of this important side event on behalf of the government of Angola, and I know our Minister of Environment, Arquitecta Ana Paula Chantluna Carvalho Pereira, would like also to be in here. Unfortunately, she could not come to Vienna due to unforeseen circumstances, but she sends a warm regards. Honorable delegates, distinguished colleagues, the conference room paper that was presented by UNODC yesterday sends a very powerful message. A clear majority of member states are either in favor of additional UNTOC protocol against wildlife trafficking or open to having this discussion. We are a state that is too often on the receiving end of this highly destructive form of transnational organized crime. It is encouraging for Angola, a biodiversity resource country, to see that member states from across the globe are willing to work together with us to advance this critically important effort to strengthen our legal framework, and we thank you for that. Wildlife trafficking, including illegal fishing and logging, is one of the largest, most lucrative criminal activities, estimated to be worth between 69 to 200 billion by UNEP and Interpol. According to the World Bank, this number rises to 1 to 3 trillion when you include the economic impact of the lost ecosystem services, such as carbon storage, biodiversity conservation, and water filtration. Other recent reports clearly describe the severe consequences of wildlife trafficking for our biodiversity, climate, and ecosystems, as well as for human and animal health. In 2019, the IPBES estimated that around 1 million animals and plant species are now threatened with extinction, with overexploitation, including through wildlife trafficking, being one of the main drivers. In 2020, the IPBES also warned that an estimated 1.7 million currently undiscovered viruses are thought to exist in mammal and avian hosts, half of which could have the ability of infected ruminants. This is a concern because illicit wildlife trafficking is known to bring humans into unnatural and unmonitored contact with wildlife, increasing the risk of potential zoonotic diseases and emergency. This is the reason why Angola President, Honorable Excellency João Lourenço, publicly called the adoption of the new global agreement on illicit wildlife trafficking in September 2021. And in May 2022, We took this commitment a step further by drafting and submitting a resolution that was eventually adopted as CCPCJ Resolution 81/1. Today, Angola is here in Vienna with you all to strongly reaffirm its commitment to strengthening the international legal framework against wildlife trafficking through a new global agreement. In the coming weeks, we will work together with other states and technical partners to analyze in depth the conference room paper released by UNODC, and we will share our feedback with you all. We're looking forward for continuous working with colleagues in this room and outside to build momentum towards creating a best possible international legal framework to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking and to the benefit of our people, our climate, and our biodiversity. Allow me to wish you all, despite our region, but in the name of biodiversity, climate, and wildlife, and our protocol, to wish you happy Africa's Day. I thank you.
We'll now move to our next speaker, His Excellency, Mr. Luis Alberto Campana Boluarte, the permanent representative of Peru to the United Nations here in Vienna. Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. Scanlon, and thank you to the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime for organizing this important side event, which Peru is proud to support alongside Angola. In the first intervention, where Angola, Peru, and Kenya was mentioned, and as being in the front line of this effort to tackling this very severe crime, but I'm sure that there is only those 3 countries. So I think many countries are in the front line alongside the official and non-official organizations, including the global institution. Excellencies and distinguished colleagues, when the UNTOC was originally negotiated in the late 90s, the trafficking and wild fauna and flora had not yet had widespread international attention. In the last years, member states would reach a strong instrument against transnational organized crime and also 3 protocols on crimes of most concern, like trafficking in person, migrant smuggling, or firearm trafficking. Since then, wildfire trafficking has grown a lot and now is one of the largest illicit transnational activities in the world. A crime that affects the safety and well-being of humans and wild animals alike. Madam Secretary of State provided a lot of information on the severe consequences, and we are sure that we all feel that this crime should be tackled. While the problem continues to escalate, our international legal framework has essentially stayed the same. We have now a mosaic of different instruments, none of which was designed to deal with wildlife trafficking and its severe consequences. Some stakeholders refers to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. We all know that, like CITES. And some of them think that CITES provide a legal framework to face this illicit wildlife trafficking. However, we consider that CITES is not an instrument to tackle this international organized crime. It does not criminalize breaches of the convention. It only applies to cross-border movement of wildlife and not, for example, the illegal harvesting or poaching. Furthermore, CITES only applies to a very small part, around 0.4% of all species and wild plants and animals. As a result, the vast majority of wild animals and plants in global trade, both legal and illegal, are not under the Convention's trade controls. In short words, existing instruments do not provide the comprehensive, legally binding regime for tackling wildlife trafficking. This is the reason why Peru, alongside Angola and Kenya, drafted, submitted, and negotiated Resolution 31/1 in the previous session of this commission. Distinguished colleagues, yesterday, you all know that the UNTOC presented the conference room paper with the title Strengthening the International Legal Framework for International Cooperation to Prevent and Combat Illicit Trafficking in Wildlife. This document includes the opinion of the majority of member states in favor of an additional UNTOC protocol or to open a discussion of this proposal. We strongly believe that time has come to move forward, to take the next step to strengthen our coordinated cross-border global response to this highly destructive form of organized crime. And we consider this step should include the negotiation of an additional protocol to prevent and combat illicit wildlife trafficking under the UNTOC. On behalf of Peru, as an ambassador here, I reiterate the official position and the political position of my country in this matter. And I respectfully encourage you to support us in this critical, important effort. Thank you very much.
Very much, Ambassador. And now I'd like to give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Evangelina Lores A. Vernas, the Permanent Representative of the Philippines at the United Nations here in Vienna. Excellency.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and colleagues who are here and online. I'd like to give perhaps a purview of what we're doing on our side of the world as something that we can look at when we incorporate different legal frameworks into a new protocol. So these are things that I think it would be good to know and to discuss, because there are many different protocols that those of us on the ground need to know and need to live out. So we really will need capacity building at the end if we have a new protocol, and we have to make sure that it really becomes effective. So as you all know, the illegal trade in wildlife and wildlife-related products carries big consequences, and particularly for our side of the world in Asia and the Pacific, and for my specific region, Southeast Asia. It is among the top 4 largest illicit trade worldwide, along with drugs, weapons, and human trafficking, and also often linked to other serious transnational crimes, such as money laundering. As IWT is a predicate offense, following the money to freeze those assets and then to divert those into conservation investment is essential to break the chain of criminal networks. The Philippines is unfortunately a consumer, a source, and transit point for IWT, threatening our native species populations, economic development, and biodiversity. The Asian Development Bank estimates the value of IWT just in the Philippines at 50 billion pesos, or around 1 billion US dollars, which includes the market value of wildlife and its resources, their ecological role and value, the damage to habitats from poaching, and loss in potential ecotourism revenues. In contrast, our local law enforcement, with a lot of courage and very limited resources, managed to seize or rescue wildlife and related products worth about 54 million pesos, or about 1 million US dollars, in 917 interagency wildlife rescue operations, but conducted over a 3-year period from 2020 to 2022. The Philippines is a party to the Convention on Biodiversity since 1992, to CITES since 1981, and to UNTOC since 2002. At the regional level, we are also actively involved in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Working Group on CITES and Wildlife Enforcement, on the ASEAN Working Group on Illicit Trafficking of Wildlife and Timber, and in the Interpol Wildlife Crime Working Group. At the local level, we recognize the threats of IWT to our country's biodiversity and economy. So our government passed legislation, created interagency groups to combat illegal wildlife trade and related products, and we continue to build capacity across our law enforcement chain. We have a Wildlife Resources Conservation Protection Act that's been enacted since 2001, out of which comes our Philippine Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, as well as the National Wildlife Law Enforcement Action Plan, or WildLEAP. And these serve as a national roadmap to address wildlife crimes and a guide to prioritizing enforcement activities, allocating funds and resources, and evaluating impacts of enforcement. So while it was groundbreaking in 2001, organized crime syndicates have become more sophisticated since then and have been able to exploit the gaps in our limited enforcement capabilities and legal loopholes that don't cover the leaps in 21st century technology now used in these crimes. Our legislature is currently looking at revisions to our Wildlife Act to strengthen our legal framework, improve our enforcement mechanisms, and interagency cooperation that will hopefully result in a more forceful and dynamic response to IWT. And this includes identifying wildlife trafficking as a distinct grave offense, as a transnational crime, and carrying stiffer penalties both monetarily and in terms of the length of imprisonment. The Philippines has also benefited from various capacity building initiatives focused on strengthening local law enforcement as well as regional cooperation through ASEAN's working group on CITES and wildlife enforcement, through our partnership with UNODC and other partners in conservation. Such efforts continue to be important in ensuring we are able to combat IWT on the ground and throughout the region. But what else can be done to strengthen the international legal framework against IWT? So as we have been speaking, and this is something that we do support in the Philippines, we also would like to propose that you look at what is already available. So for instance, in ASEAN, we adopted a plan of action on cooperation on CITES and wildlife law enforcement in 2021 to 2025. And in 2019, the ASEAN ministers responsible for CITES and wildlife enforcement issued the Chiang Mai Statement on IWT. These regional initiatives outline ASEAN's commitments on increased action-oriented policy, law enforcement, wildlife crime, and demand reduction. The Chiang Mai Statement tackles ASEAN coordination on IWT, closing domestic wildlife markets where it contributes to poaching and illegal trade, enhancing domestic legislation, reaffirming stronger responses to corruption and money laundering, and ensuring continued efforts on enforcement networking. We also produced an ASEAN handbook on legal cooperation to combat illegal wildlife trade. But central to all of these efforts are alignment and harmonization of laws and policies, not for us in ASEAN member states, but perhaps we also need to think about alignment across the globe. One small part of this is the Coral Triangle Initiative on coral reefs, fisheries, and food security, which includes ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Timor-Leste, and the Melanesian countries, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. The CTICFF aims to harmonize policies to make it easier to cooperate and monitor illegal fishing and illegal capture of endangered species throughout the Coral Triangle, regardless of national jurisdiction. For us, the mutual legal assistance is the formal procedure by which actors in criminal justice systems cooperate across borders to conduct criminal investigations and collect evidence. It's primarily governed by bilateral or multilateral treaties which impose obligations on states to cooperate under specific circumstances. And the use of MLAs have been driven by an urge to improve international cooperation in the suppression of transnational crime. So UNTOC contains detailed provisions on MLA, and all ASEAN members are parties to UNTOC and could use the convention as a basis of national law. In practice, those states have generally preferred to enter into a bilateral treaty with, depending on the state. At the regional level, we have the 2004 ASEAN Treaty on Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters, which was elevated to an ASEAN treaty in 2019 and is in force among all ASEAN member states. But perhaps it is time to look at implementing this ASEAN treaty, or perhaps incorporating it into this new protocol on what needs to be done really at the national level of each country to ensure the effectiveness and applicability of this treaty and the new protocol that we want to see. We can use these regional cooperation mechanisms to more closely cooperate with other regional groups to more effectively shut down IWT. We must remember that nature has no borders, and the illicit trade in wildlife respects neither nature nor borders. Harmonizing our different mechanisms so that we can work together across borders is a matter of survival. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I'm now delighted to give the floor to Ms. Virginia Patton-Brew. She's the Attorney Advisor, Office of the Legal Advisor, Law Enforcement and Intelligence with the Department of State with the United States.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm quite humbled to be in the presence of such an august panel. So thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity. And let me just introduce myself. I'm with the Office of the Legal Advisor at the State Department. I've been there too long, a couple of decades at this point. And I'm no longer an active practitioner in terms of being a prosecutor or a defense counsel. But before I joined the State Department, I had about 3 decades worth of experience, both prosecuting and defending. And so in that regard, I have a lot of experience with laws and understanding the fabric of our laws. And so when you say that we need to strengthen the fabric, I think we certainly would agree with that. But does that lead to a protocol at this time? And we think there is an awful lot of work that can be done at the national level to strengthen the laws that we already have. Because simply having a law, or unfortunately simply having a protocol, means nothing if you don't effectively implement it. So what can we do nationally to strengthen the laws that we have? Well, one thing that we attempted to introduce last year in the CCPCJ was the concept that in our law, we call it the Lacey Act, and that the name won't mean anything to you. But what is significant about this act is that it allows us to make as a criminal offense in our domestic law the violation of another country's laws with respect to the import or export of protected species, whether it's plants or animals. This is a hugely significant act. We couldn't possibly, as a national fabric of laws, adopt all the laws that every single country has. That it would just be impossible. But by having this provision where a criminal who violates let's say the laws of Angola and attempts to bring in a species into the United States, the fact that they violated that law in Angola, that is what we need to constitute the violation of the law in the United States. So a hugely effective tool. We really would recommend that governments give consideration to incorporating these ideas. If we could have a network of countries around the world where we all use the laws of each other, frankly, that would be much more effective than a protocol that replicates what we already have in the TOC. And then let me talk a little bit about the Transnational Organized Crime Convention, because you mentioned extradition, mutual legal assistance, capacity building, all very important. Those are already in the TOC. So we don't need a separate instrument, although as you stated, many of us do rely on our bilateral agreements, because in those agreements, we can be more specific about the issues that the two countries have. But where you don't have that kind of a bilateral agreement, the multilateral agreements and the clauses in the UNTOC and also in the UNCAC, the UN Convention Against Corruption, those both can apply. And of course, as we look at the various crimes that involve wildlife, certainly one of the most significant is corruption. And what we have learned is that corruption is invariably a domestic concern. You have to have the political will at the very top of the government in order to eradicate corruption. And having pressure from outside, while it is enthusiastic and it helps to raise awareness, it will do nothing to really eliminate the domestic corruption. So the UNTOC is another tool to look at. But one thing about the UNTOC that bears mentioning, and that is the provision that allows us to criminalize and to use the fabric of the UNTOC when we have what we call a significant criminal offense, a serious offense. And what is a serious offense? It has to be a group of 3 or more. In every wildlife trafficking chain, you'll have at least 3 people. So right there, it will apply. But where we have the gap is where countries do not treat these crimes with the seriousness in terms of the offenses. It has to be 4 years or more. That has to be what the jeopardy is, what the liability is. It doesn't mean everybody gets sentenced to 4 years. It means that is the minimum of the maximum sentence, if you will, that you have. We have looked at several countries that are very enthusiastic about fighting trafficking in wildlife, and then find that in the very beginning of the chain where the animal is poached, for example, those are treated very lightly. And if you don't treat that aspect of the offense as seriously as you treat the other aspects of the offense, you're not going to have a successful prosecution, and you're not going to eradicate the crime. So totally agree that we need to strengthen the fabric of laws, but would say that for now, let's put our energy on strengthening the laws we have and implementing those laws. I think you could say that my country is one that is open to this discussion, but we really believe that the stepping stones first that have to be achieved are strengthening the fabric that we have, using that fabric, and implementing our obligations under the existing treaties. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pat. And we're now going to move to Mr. Setoti Maika, who is the Director General of Financial Reporting Center in Kenya. Over to you, Director General.
Yeah, thank you, John. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, good afternoon. Then before I give my statement, allow me also to introduce myself, because I know the Financial Reporting Center is not very explicit in the program as what it is in Kenya. This is basically the financial intelligence unit that has a mandate to identify processes of crime and money laundering. And in our case, we took an all-offense approach to deal with crime. So wildlife crime is part of what we investigate as a financial intelligence unit. Distinguished colleagues, in May 2022, Kenya was one of the original co-sponsors of the CCPCJ Resolution 31/1, which we proudly drafted and submitted alongside Angola and Peru. And this was in recognition of the serious consequences wildlife trafficking continues to have on our wildlife heritage and biodiversity, natural resources, economy, security, safety, and overall well-being. Tackling this highly destructive form of transnational organized crime has been and continues being a priority for Kenya, and we are delighted to see that this commission is dedicating more time and attention to this topic. My colleagues from Angola and Peru have just perfectly highlighted the gaps in the current international legal framework to tackle wildlife trafficking, and in my statement, I'll focus on possible ways to address some of them. As expressed in our response to the UNODC questionnaire, Kenya strongly supports the adoption of an additional protocol to the UNTOC to prevent and combat illicit wildlife trafficking. 3 protocols already exist dealing with other serious forms of transnational organized crime, namely human trafficking, migrant trafficking, illicit firearm manufacturing and trafficking. A 4th protocol on preventing and combating illicit wildlife trafficking will have numerous benefits. For instance, in negotiating such a protocol, state parties should develop and adopt a definition of illicit wildlife trafficking, which will facilitate a convergence of national strategies and approaches, thereby enhancing both domestic and international cooperation. The additional protocol will also enable states to agree on how they will cooperate to prevent and combat this serious crime. These could include the conduct that is to be criminalized, categorization of wildlife crime as serious crime, or species of wildlife, fauna, and flora to include within its scope, and making it a criminal offense to import any wildlife or wildlife products into a country if that has been acquired in contravention of the national laws of the source country. And this is where we lack a goodwill. Demand drives supply. Other issues that could be considered by states, including inter alia, the role and responsibilities of carriers of wildlife contraband, are equally instrumentalities of a crime, just like any other instrumentality that is involved in crime. Verification of the legitimacy and validity of documents, including any documents suspected of being misused, the return of seized and confiscated wildlife products to the source country, cooperating on training and technical assistance, wildlife enforcement agencies and financial intelligence units cooperation, sharing information and forensic samples, public awareness and sensitization, and measures to discourage demand. And lastly, incentives for community-led conservation using the wildlife or natural resources conservancy model, like the one we are using in Kenya, to meet other incentives such as the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement carbon credit mechanism. This is basically to give incentives to those unsung heroes who are part and parcel of the conservation that continues to give us a biodiversity. And John and colleagues, I speak about that passionately. We must have heard of the Maasais in Kenya. I'm one of them. I've grown up in a wildlife environment and continue to live alongside all the wildlife, the big five that you talk about in Kenya. Such protocols will also automatically trigger general tools for cross-border cooperation without the need to make offenses punishable by 4 years imprisonment or more. These will serve to enhance the use of provisions of international cooperation, mutual legal assistance, joint investigations, special investigative techniques such as controlled deliveries, and law enforcement cooperation provisions in preventing and combating the illicit trafficking of wildlife. Distinguished colleagues, Kenya warmly welcomes the conference room paper released yesterday by UNODC and is delighted to see so many member states from all regions are either supportive or open-minded about the possibility of an additional protocol to the UNTOC. We now stand ready to discuss next steps and constructive ways to move forward. We hope we can engage and count on you on this endeavor. Thank you.
All kinds of crime affect environment. And when we have to develop capacity based on dedicated investigative tools to have relevant specialized investigators, including judges and prosecutors, we have some time, depending on the country, in my point of view, again I speak on my own capacity, as we face some difficulty to have relevant actors on the ground to investigate. And my question is about, it's not a question, this is just to share some point of view. It's maybe a real added value, like you said, the preliminary introductory speech, is a question about broader approach of the scope. For what? Because again, on the ground, we can specialize investigators, judges, and prosecutors. But the question is about if we can specialize for different kind of crime related with enrollment. The report you introduced by Europol was a report on environmental crime. Let me to share, if I still 1 minute. Yes. Yeah. When we discussed in Brussels in 2017 to prioritize for the first time environmental crime, there were discussions on what we should focus, speaking about environmental crime. Of course, wildlife trafficking, and we investigate my unit, some others, and so on within EU, and so on, in close cooperation with other regions at the global levels. But raised by some member states, some delegates and representatives of civil society, saying, oh, by the way, you are not identified, for instance, wildlife trafficking. You are not identified, and so on and so on. And it means we agreed, it's publicly information on the internet, we agreed to prioritize the first time, for the first year, wildlife trafficking, and more depending what during serious organized crime assessment we identified on the ground. And step by step we enlarge. It's an issue. Maybe to share with you, when we currently led some investigation, it's clear when we qualify specialized investigators, particularly for cyber investigation, financial investigation for money laundering with a predicate offense in the field of environment, asset recovery, and so on. I'm not sure that everywhere it's possible to specialize just for this kind crime related to environment. Maybe there is reason to say why not to have a broader approach. It's what I'm going to share with you. Just maybe the last one, I'm so sorry, but when we discuss at the expert group of the G7, you know, maybe there were press release, there were declaration of Ministry of Interior of G7 on how to progress in connection with all crime related to biodiversity and so on, nature and so on. And there were, the declaration point out the need to address crime affect environment. And again, we have in mind the Interpol approach. Interpol groups are well developed, if you look, different subgroups. I remember at the beginning there were the first one on wildlife trafficking, and then we encompass more and more. And when Europol promote what we call NEST, National Environmental Task Force for Environment Security, it means we not focus on one, but more. Just contributions, not to, you said at the beginning, there was some discussion maybe for a broader approach. Thank you very much.
Okay, Christian. Please, yes.
Less than 1 minute. Just to give an introduction of my previous work, in the late 90s, I prepared the National Law of Environment. I worked also on the criminalization of the environmental offenses in a new law. And then being Minister of Environment, I realized that we need to work more closely with other states bilaterally, because, you know, as was mentioned, natural resources, wildlife doesn't have frontiers, political frontiers, and we are facing, and I would like to also to mention that one of the most important instruments that we have in our countries is the carbon credit or carbon bonds. And under this instrument, RED Plus is one very important tool, and we need to support those private entrepreneurs that are working and trying to keep their forests, trying to keep their biodiversity, and And this is a responsibility that our government has. They are facing the increase of demand from markets very far away from, in this case, from Latin America. People from Asia that are asking just one little part of one jaguar because it has some properties, they say. So jaguars are not anymore a problem regarding conflict with cattle. Now jaguar is a target for this criminal organization. So this is just one example that we need international cooperation, and I think that the former prosecutor Patron also said something very important. We can improve our national laws. This is definitely true, but it also we need international cooperation, and we can do that through a protocol. I'm absolutely sure. Thank you.